Humans are the most beautiful and venomous predators in the galaxy, and Roy Phillips was the deadliest of them all. Roy swirled the shot of Delton liquor in his hand before downing it in one smooth motion, relishing the searing burn that slid down his throat like molten lava. He didn't even glance up as Pixis slid into the seat across from him, the Delton's movements jittery and nervous compared to Roy's relaxed demeanor. The seedy bar on Zeta Prime was a blur of activity around them, but Roy's focus was solely on the data chip that Pixis pushed across the table with a trembling tentacle. This contains the location of a massive cache of ancient alien weapons, hidden on a long-abandoned planet in the outer reaches, powerful enough to turn the tide of any war, Pixis said, his voice barely audible over the din of the bar. Roy's eyebrow quirked up as he examined the data chip. Normally he'd dismiss such claims as mere fantasy, but the pure, naked fear in Pixis' eyes told him that this was no ordinary mission. This was something big, something dangerous. Another mercenary group is after the weapons too, the Crimson Fangs. I need you to get there first and secure the cache. The payoff will be substantial, Pixis said, his voice trembling slightly. A slow grin spread across Roy's face as he snatched up the data chip and stood to leave. He could already feel the adrenaline starting to pump through his veins at the prospect of a challenging mission with a big payday at the end. But as he strolled out of the bar, he was unaware of the look of pure terror that Pixis was giving his retreating form. You see, Deltons knew the truth about humans, even if the rest of the galaxy remained blissfully unaware. They knew that beneath the humans' benign appearance lurked the most ruthless predators in existence, not because of their technology or their physical strength, but because of their minds, cold, calculating, and utterly without mercy. There was a reason, after all, why the Deltan Council had declared the planet forbidden. As Pixis watched Roy disappear into the crowd, he couldn't help but shudder at the thought of the horrors that awaited the human on that cursed planet. But in the end, did it really matter? Let the Crimson Fang kill them. Let the twisted alien weapons tear them to shreds. Let the Voidsong drive them into madness. It made no difference in the end, because if there was one thing that Pixis knew for certain, it was this. Humans were the monsters that even monsters feared. The landscape that greeted him was unlike anything he'd ever seen. Jagged spires of onyx rock clawed at the sky like the fangs of some colossal beast, while shimmering pools of iridescent liquid dotted the surface, their colors shifting and swirling hypnotically. Roy set his ship down in a sheltered canyon a few clicks from the Delton ship's location, then checked his gear. He selected his trusty plasma rifle and a handful of grenades before setting out on foot towards the coordinates. As he picked his way through the alien terrain, an unsettling sensation prickled at the back of Roy's neck. He couldn't shake the feeling that unseen eyes were tracking his every move. Fleeting glimpses of movement flickered in his peripheral vision, but when he turned to look, there was only stillness and silence. Suddenly, his calm crackled to life, Pixis's voice urgent and panicked. "Roy, you need to get out of there. Now I just found out why that planet is forbidden. The weapons, they're not just—" The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving only static. Roy tried to reach Pixis again, but got no response. Unease growing, Roy pressed forward, determined to complete the mission. As he crested a ridge, he spotted the entrance to an ancient structure carved into the base of a massive spire. The Deltan ship was parked nearby, but there was no sign of the other mercs. Suddenly, a blood-curdling scream ripped through the air, coming from inside the structure. Roy rushed forward, rifle at the ready, but nothing could have prepared him for the sight that greeted him inside. The chamber was a charnel house. Deltan corpses sprawled everywhere, frozen in agonized death throes. Entrails dangled from ripped abdomens, limbs were flung out at unnatural angles, dried blood painted the floor and walls. The stench of death and fear hung thick in the air. In the chamber's center, an orb of pure pulsing energy hovered above a pedestal, bathing the carnage in an eerie, flickering glow. Roy's heart hammered as he approached, plasma rifle aimed at the enigmatic sphere. Alien symbols were etched into the pedestal's surface, their meanings lost to time. As Roy drew closer, the orb's light intensified, as if sensing his presence. Suddenly tendrils of searing energy lashed out, ensnaring Roy's arms and legs. He fought against their pull, muscles straining, but the force was irresistible. His boots skidded on the gore-slick floor as he was dragged inexorably towards the orb. Blinding agony lanced through Roy's skull as he neared the sphere, like incandescent needles drilling into his brain. Visions flashed through his mind's eye, each more horrifying than the last. Entire civilizations consumed by a voracious hunger that could never be sated. Planets stripped of every resource, every scrap of life, left as desiccated husks, and at the center of it all, an ancient, malevolent presence, delighting in the destruction. With a desperate surge of strength, Roy tore free of the tendril's grasp. He staggered back, chest heaving, skin slick with sweat. The truth crashed over him like a wave of icy water. There was no weapons cache. It had all been a ruse, a lure to draw the unwary into this entity's clutches. The orb itself was the danger, a sentient being that fed off the life force of those it trapped. Roy raised his rifle, finger tightening on the trigger. He had to destroy this thing here and now, but as he prepared to fire, the orb pulsed with searing energy. A shockwave slammed into Roy, hurling him backwards like a rag doll. His head cracked against the chamber wall. Dazed, ears ringing, Roy looked up. The orb was glowing brighter than a sun, tendrils of energy swirling around it like the arms of a galactic monster. Roy's blood ran cold as realization dawned. This wasn't just a trap. It was a living weapon. Roy hauled himself up from the floor, ignoring the searing agony that shot through his body. He raised his plasma rifle and fired at the pulsating orb, but the energy bolt simply vanished into its swirling depths without even a ripple. The orb retaliated immediately, hurling a barrage of sizzling energy at him. Roy hurled himself behind a nearby pillar just in time, the bolts slamming into the ancient stone and sending chips of rock flying. He knew his weapons were useless, but surrender wasn't an option. Roy scanned the chamber, looking for anything that might give him an edge. Then he saw it, a repeating pattern in the alien symbols that covered the walls. Acting on pure instinct, he began inputting the sequence into his suit's computer, praying it would reveal some kind of weakness. The orb continued its relentless assault as Roy worked feverishly. The chamber shook with each blast, dust raining down from the ceiling. Just as he input the final symbol, a hidden panel slid open in the wall with a grating sound, revealing a small, crystalline device. Roy lunged for it, but a tendril of energy lashed out from the orb, snatching the device and pulling it towards the swirling core. Without hesitation, Roy grabbed onto the energy tendril, letting it drag him forward. As he neared the orb's surface, he felt the device in his hand begin to vibrate, resonating with the orb's pulsing energy. With a final burst of strength, Roy plunged his hand, device and all, into the heart of the orb. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the orb began to pulse erratically, its surface crackling with arcs of blinding energy. Pain like he'd never known seared through Roy's hand and up his arm, but he clenched his teeth and held on, refusing to let go. Suddenly the orb exploded in a blinding flash of light. The shockwave hurled Roy across the room like a rag doll. He slammed into the far wall and crumpled to the floor, gasping for breath. When the spots finally cleared from his vision, Roy saw that the orb was gone, nothing left but a pile of shimmering dust. Roy stumbled through the twisted corridors of the ancient structure, his steps faltering as the adrenaline from the battle began to fade. The eerie, pulsing glow from his corrupted hand cast long shadows on the walls, a constant reminder of the darkness that now resided within him. With each step, he felt the whispers in his mind grow louder, urging him to embrace the power that coursed through his veins. As he neared his ship, a flicker of movement caught his eye. He spun around, plasma rifle at the ready, but there was nothing there, just the stillness of the alien landscape and the soft hum of his ship's engines. Roy shook his head, trying to clear the fog that seemed to be settling over his thoughts. Roy felt a chill run down his spine. "What are you talking about, Pixis? What's happening to me?" Pixis leaned forward, his expression grave. "The orb, Roy. It wasn't just a weapon, it was a seed, a remnant of an ancient malevolent species that once terrorized the galaxy. By destroying it, you've released its essence into yourself." Roy looked down at his hand. the iridescent veins pulsing beneath the mottled black skin. He could feel the power thrumming within, a dark energy that seemed to whisper promises of untold strength and domination. "There has to be a way to stop this," Roy said, his voice barely above a whisper. Pixis nodded. "There is. Come to me, Roy. I'm at a remote research station on the edge of Deltan space. I have the knowledge and resources to purge the corruption from your body, but you must hurry. The longer the essence remains within you, the stronger its hold becomes." Roy set the coordinates, his jaw clenched with determination. As the ship hurtled through the void, he closed his eyes, trying to block out the whispers that echoed in his mind. But the visions came unbidden, flashes of worlds consumed by darkness, of entire species enslaved to an insatiable hunger. He could feel his body changing, his muscles growing stronger, his senses sharpening to an almost painful intensity. The power within him was seductive, promising him dominion over all who stood in his way. Roy shook his head, trying to clear the dark thoughts. He had to hold on to resist the pull of the corruption until he reached Pixis. But when he arrived at the research station, he found no salvation waiting for him, only betrayal. Pixis stood before him, surrounded by a group of heavily armed Deltan soldiers, their weapons trained on Roy. "I'm sorry, my friend," Pixis said, his voice heavy with regret, "but we can't let this spread. The Council has ordered your termination." Roy felt the rage rising within him, a fury that burned hotter than any star. The darkness surged to the surface, consuming him, transforming him into a being of pure, unbridled malevolence. With a roar that shook the very foundations of the station, he lunged at the soldiers, his corrupted hand pulsing with an unholy energy. They fell before him like wheat before a scythe, their weapons useless against the dark power that flowed through Roy's veins. In a blur of motion, he tore through their ranks, leaving a trail of broken bodies in his wake. And when the last soldier fell, Roy turned his gaze upon Pixis, the Deltan cowering before him, pleading for mercy. Roy's hand gripped Pixis's collar, trembling with rage and the strain of holding back the darkness within. The Deltan's eyes were wide with terror, his breaths coming in shallow gasps. For a long moment, Roy stared into those eyes, the whispering voices in his mind urging him to end Pixis's life, to give in to the corruption that pulsed through his veins. But something deep within Roy resisted. A flicker of his old self, stubborn and unyielding, fought against the darkness. With a supreme effort of will, he unclenched his fist, the eerie glow fading from his corrupted hand. He realized that killing Pixis would only serve the malevolent entity that now resided within him. It was what the darkness wanted. "You're going to help me find a way to fix this," Roy growled, his voice low and dangerous. He pulled Pixis closer, until their faces were mere inches apart. "And if you betray me again, I'll show you just how scary humans can be." Pixis nodded frantically, his terror mingling with a glimmer of hope in his eyes. He had seen a flash of the old Roy, the human he had known before the darkness took hold. Together, they turned to the station's databases, searching for any scrap of information that might help them understand the ancient species that had created the orb, and how to combat its insidious influence. As they worked, Roy felt the darkness writhing within him, straining against the chains of his will. His corrupted hand pulsed with energy, the veins glowing brighter with each passing hour. He learned to channel the power, to focus it into a weapon he could use against their enemies. But it was a double-edged sword, and Roy knew that every time he drew upon the darkness, it brought him one step closer to losing himself entirely. Their search led them to the ruins of an ancient civilization on a nearby planet, a species that had also encountered the malevolent entity. As they picked their way through the crumbling structures, Roy and Pixis discovered a mural depicting a figure consumed by darkness, yet still fighting against it. Half of the figure's body was twisted and corrupted, but the other half remained untouched, a beacon of light in the darkness. Roy stared at the image, realization dawning. It was a message, a testament to the power of the human spirit to resist, even in the face of overwhelming evil. If this ancient species could fight back against the corruption, then so could he. But just as they uncovered this crucial piece of the puzzle, a hail of blaster fire erupted around them. Roy spun, his corrupted hand flaring with dark energy, to see a group of heavily armed mercenaries bearing down on their position. The Deltan Council had hired them to finish what they had started back on the station. Rage surged through Roy's veins, the darkness within him howling for release. He let it loose, the power coursing through him like a raging inferno. Moving with inhuman speed, he tore through the mercenaries, his corrupted hand leaving trails of searing darkness in its wake. Bones shattered, flesh sizzled, and screams of agony filled the ancient ruins. Pixis watched in horror as Roy ripped the mercenaries apart, the savagery of his attacks terrifying even to the battle-hardened Deltan. This was not the Roy he knew, but a monster driven by an insatiable hunger for destruction. As the last mercenary fell, Roy staggered, the darkness within him surging forward, threatening to consume him entirely. He fell to his knees, his vision dimming, the whispers in his mind growing to a deafening roar. Pixis rushed to Roy's side, half dragging, half carrying the human back to their ship. He could feel the darkness pulsing beneath Roy's skin, could see the corruption spreading further with each passing moment. Pixis knew that time was running out. If they couldn't find a way to purge the malevolent essence from Roy's body, the human would be lost forever, his mind and soul consumed by an ancient, insatiable evil. As the ship blasted away from the planet's surface, Pixis looked down at Roy's unconscious form, the human's face twisted in a rictus of pain. He knew that the battle for Roy's soul had only just begun, and that the road ahead would be fraught with danger and uncertainty. As the ship hurtled through the void, Pixis hunched over the ancient texts, his eyes darting across the alien symbols as he searched for a way to save Roy from the darkness that consumed him. In the dimly lit cargo hold, Roy lay on a makeshift bed, his body convulsing as the malevolent presence within him waged war against his humanity. Inside Roy's mind, he found himself in a twisted, nightmarish landscape. The ground beneath his feet was a sickly, pulsating black, and the sky above swirled with eerie, iridescent hues. Before him stood a shadowy figure, a dark mirror of himself, its eyes glowing with the same unholy light that now pulsed through Roy's veins. "You cannot resist me forever," the shadow hissed, its voice a distorted echo of Roy's own. "Embrace the power, and together we can rule the galaxy." Roy shook his head, his fists clenched at his sides. "I'll never give in to you," he growled, his voice raw with determination. "I am human, and humans don't surrender to darkness." The shadow laughed, a chilling sound that seemed to reverberate through the twisted landscape. "You fool," it sneered, "you already have." With a roar of defiance, Roy launched himself at the shadow, the darkness within him surging forth to meet his doppelganger in a clash of wills. They grappled in a whirlwind of shadows, Roy's humanity pitted against the shadow's malevolence. In the real world, Pixis's eyes widened as he found the passage he sought, a ritual of purification designed to cleanse the body and soul of corruption. But the text warned of the agony the subject would endure, and the risk that they might not survive the ordeal. Roy's eyes fluttered open, the iridescent glow within them pulsing in time with his heartbeat. "Do it," he rasped, his voice barely audible. "I can't. I won't let this thing win." Pixis nodded, gathering the materials he needed from the crates they'd brought back from the ruins. He began to paint intricate symbols on Roy's bare skin, his hands shaking as he chanted the ancient words of power. As the ritual progressed, Roy's body began to glow, the darkness within him fighting against the cleansing light. He screamed, his back arching off the bed as the two forces battled within him. Pixis continued to chant, his voice rising in volume as he poured all his strength into the ritual. In Roy's mindscape, the shadow lunged at him, its claws tearing at his flesh. But Roy stood firm, drawing on the very darkness that threatened to consume him, using it as a weapon against his foe. With a final, desperate effort, Roy seized the shadow, pulling it into himself, absorbing it even as it struggled and screamed. In the cargo hold, Roy's body lifted off the bed, suspended in mid-air by the sheer energy of the conflict raging within him. Pixis's chanting reached a crescendo, the symbols on Roy's skin blazing with blinding light. And then, with a final ear-splitting crack, Roy dropped back onto the bed unconscious. Pixis stumbled forward, his strength nearly spent. With trembling fingers he checked Roy's pulse, letting out a sigh of relief when he found it steady and strong. The black, pulsing veins that had spider-webbed Roy's skin were gone, leaving only faint, silvery scars in their wake. But as Pixis leaned closer, he noticed something else. Roy's eyes, now open but unseeing, glowed with a faint, iridescent light, a reminder of the darkness he had taken into himself, the shadow he had accepted but refused to let control him. Pixis sat back, his heart heavy with the knowledge that their battle was far from over. Roy had won this fight, but the war for his soul had only just begun. Roy lay on the makeshift cot in the ship's cargo hold, his body still racked with residual tremors from the purification ritual. Pixis hovered nearby, monitoring his vital signs and murmuring words of encouragement. The Deltan's face was drawn and haggard, the stress of the past few days etched into every line. Suddenly the ship's comm system crackled to life, a panicked voice filling the air. "This is the Deltan colony on Zeta Prime. We are under attack by an unknown enemy. They're everywhere, consuming everything in their path. We need help." Pix's eyes widened as he listened to the distress call, his hands flying over the console as he tried to boost the signal. "This is Pixis of the Deltan Research Council. We hear you, Zeta Prime. Can you give us more information on the attackers?" The voice on the other end was nearly drowned out by the sounds of screams and weapons fire. "They're some kind of insectoid creatures, unlike anything we've ever seen. Our weapons are barely slowing them down. They're tearing through our defenses like they're made of paper. Please, we need help now. Pixis turned to Roy, who was struggling to sit up, his face still pale and drawn. "The Deltan Council is requesting your aid, Roy. They say if you help them stop this threat, they'll clear your name." Roy let out a bitter laugh, wincing as the movement sent a fresh wave of pain through his body. "So now they want my help, after they tried to kill me?" Pixis placed a hand on Roy's shoulder, his expression earnest. "I know it's a lot to ask, especially after everything you've been through, but this could be a chance to prove that you can control the darkness, use it for good, and if we can get the Council on our side, it could go a long way towards finding a permanent solution to your condition." Roy was silent for a long moment, his eyes distant as he grappled with the decision. Finally he nodded, his jaw set with determination. "All right, set a course for Zeta Prime. Let's see what these bugs are made of." As the ship hurtled through the void, Roy stood before the viewport, staring out at the stars. He could feel the darkness within him, pulsing in time with his heartbeat. It was a constant presence now, a weight that he carried with him always. But for the first time since the orb had infected him, he felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe Pixis was right. Maybe he could learn to control this power, to use it to help others instead of just fighting against it. The ship shuddered as it dropped out of hyperspace, the green and blue orb of Zeta Prime looming before them. As they entered the atmosphere, Roy could see the colony below, a sprawling settlement nestled in the heart of a lush jungle. But even from this distance he could tell something was wrong. Smoke rose from the buildings and the air was filled with the sound of weapons fire and inhuman screeches. Pixis set the ship down on the outskirts of the colony, and Roy strode down the ramp, his plasma rifle at the ready. The colonists had set up a makeshift barricade around the perimeter, but it was clear they were fighting a losing battle. The creatures swarmed over the walls like a living tide, their chitinous bodies gleaming in the harsh sunlight. Roy waded into the fray, his enhanced strength and speed making short work of the insectoids. He tore through them with brutal efficiency, his rifle spitting plasma bolts that burned through their tough exoskeletons. But for every one he killed, 2 more seemed to take its place, an endless swarm that threatened to overwhelm him. As he fought, Roy began to notice something strange. The creatures seemed to be drawn to him, their movements becoming more coordinated and purposeful in his presence. It was as if they were being directed by some unseen force, a hive mind that was guiding their actions. Pix's voice crackled over the comm, his tone urgent. "Roy, I'm picking up some kind of signal emanating from the creatures. It's like they're being controlled by a central intelligence, and it seems to be reaching out to you, sensing the darkness within you." Roy felt a chill run down his spine as he realized the implications. The hive mind was targeting him specifically, trying to assert its dominance over the power that lurked within him. He tried to withdraw from the battle, to put some distance between himself and the creatures, but they pressed in, their numbers seemingly endless. In a moment of desperation, Roy reached out with his mind, tapping into the darkness that coiled within him. He could feel the hive mind's presence, a vast, alien intelligence that dwarfed his own. It was ancient and powerful, a being that had consumed countless worlds in its insatiable hunger. Roy pushed back against the hive mind's will, trying to assert his own dominance. It was a battle of pure mental force, a struggle that threatened to tear his mind apart. He could feel the darkness surging within him, responding to the hive mind's call, but he refused to let it consume him. Slowly, painfully, Roy began to gain the upper hand. He could sense the hive mind's fear, its recognition of him as a superior predator. It fought back with everything it had, but Roy's will was stronger. With a final, decisive push, he asserted his dominance, and the hive mind recoiled, its control over the swarm broken. The devourers froze in place, their movements suddenly stilted and uncoordinated. Roy walked among them, his eyes glowing with that eerie, iridescent light. The colonists watched in a mixture of awe and terror as he passed, the creatures parting before him like water. Roy and Pixis stood amongst the wreckage of the Deltan colony, the acrid stench of devourer ichor and singed chitin hanging heavy in the air. The colonists emerged from their hiding places, wide eyes fixed on Roy, a mixture of awe and fear etched onto their faces. "You saved us," one of them said, his voice trembling. "We owe you our lives." Roy shook his head, the iridescent glow of his eyes dimming. "You owe me nothing. I did what needed to be done." The Deltan Council soon arrived, their ships descending from the sky like gleaming birds of prey. They offered Roy their gratitude, and with it, a full pardon. "Your actions here have proven your worth," the council leader said, her gaze appraising. "We would be honored to have you join us, Roy. Your power could be a great asset to the Deltan people." Roy was silent for a long moment, the weight of the decision heavy on his shoulders. The temptation was there to accept their offer, to find a place among them, but deep within, he knew it could never be. "I appreciate the offer," he said at last, his voice steady, "but I cannot accept. The darkness within me, while under control, is still a part of who I am. I fear that staying here, among those who fear and mistrust what I've become, will only lead to more conflict. I need to find my own path." The council leader nodded, a flicker of disappointment in her eyes. "We understand. Know that you will always have an ally in the Deltan people, Roy." As the council ships departed, Pixis approached Roy, a look of determination on his face. "I'm coming with you," he said, his tone brooking no argument. "You shouldn't have to face this alone." Roy started to protest, but saw the resolve in his friend's eyes. He nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "I'd be glad to have you along, Pixis." Together they boarded Roy's ship, the sleek vessel rising into the sky and disappearing into the vast expanse of space. They had no set destination, only a purpose, to understand the nature of the darkness that now resided within Roy. Their journey took them to the far reaches of the galaxy, to worlds both wondrous and terrifying. On each planet they found traces of the ancient species, remnants of their influence scattered like forgotten relics. On a world of endless deserts, they discovered a ruined temple, its walls etched with glowing glyphs that pulsed in time with Roy's heartbeat. Within its crumbling chambers, they found a mural depicting the fall of the ancients, consumed by the very darkness they sought to control. On another planet, a verdant jungle world, they encountered a tribe of natives who worshipped the darkness as a god. They spoke of a prophecy, of a being who would come to wield the darkness as a weapon against the forces of evil. Roy listened to their tales, a growing unease settling in his gut. The weight of his power pressed down on him, a constant reminder of the burden he now carried. But even as they sought answers, new threats emerged from the shadows. Bounty hunters, drawn by the tales of Roy's power, dogged their steps, seeking to capture him for their own gain. Rogue Deltan factions, fearful of what Roy had become, sent assassins to eliminate the perceived threat. Through it all, Roy and Pixis fought side by side, their bond growing stronger with each shared trial. But even as they grew closer, Roy felt the darkness within him, always lurking, always tempting. It whispered to him in his dreams, promising power beyond imagining if he would only surrender to its embrace. It taunted him with visions of those he had failed to save, their blood on his hands. Roy resisted, clinging to his humanity with a desperate tenacity. But the struggle was constant, a battle waged every waking moment. He knew he walked a fine line, that one misstep could send him tumbling into the abyss. It was on a nameless moon, a bleak and lifeless place, that they finally found the truth they sought. In a cavern deep beneath the surface, they discovered an ancient artifact, a shard of purest darkness that pulsed with a malevolent energy. As Roy approached, the shard seemed to come alive, tendrils of inky blackness reaching out to caress his skin. In that moment, he saw the truth of the ancients, the terrible price they had paid for their arrogance. They had sought to harness the darkness, to bend it to their will, but the darkness had consumed them, twisting them into abominations that fed on the very life force of the universe. Roy, with his human will and strength of spirit, represented a chance to break the cycle, to wield the darkness without being consumed by it. But he was also a threat, a being who could be turned into a weapon of unimaginable destruction if he fell into the wrong hands. The realization hit Roy like a physical blow, staggering in its implications. He knew in that moment what he had to do. He turned to Pixis, his eyes glowing with a fierce resolve. "I won't let them control me," he said, his voice low and intense. "I won't be their pawn or their weapon. I'll forge my own path, use this power to protect those who can't protect themselves. But I have to do it alone." Pixis started to protest, but saw the determination in Roy's gaze. He nodded slowly, a sad smile on his face. "I understand. Just remember, you'll always have a friend in me, Roy, no matter where your path takes you." He knew the path ahead would be hard, that he would face challenges and temptations beyond anything he had ever known. But he also knew, with a certainty that rang in his very bones, that this was his destiny. Roy, the human who had looked into the abyss and emerged changed, but unbroken. The wielder of darkness, the protector of light. He would walk the stars, a solitary guardian standing against the forces that threatened to consume all. For he was both beautiful and venomous, a being unique in all the galaxy, and his story was only just beginning. As the years passed, Roy's name became a legend whispered across the galaxy. Some spoke of him as a savior, a guardian who walked the stars, protecting the innocent from the darkness that lurked in the shadows. Others saw him as a demon, a harbinger of destruction, a being of unimaginable power who left only chaos in his wake. But to Roy these were just stories, tales told by those who had never known the true weight of the darkness he carried within. He wandered the galaxy, a solitary figure, never staying in one place for too long, always moving, always searching for a way to balance the scales within himself. It was in a seedy bar on the outskirts of the Deltan system that the message found him. A hologram flickered to life before him, the face of the Deltan council leader, her expression grave. "Roy," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "we need your help. A new threat has emerged, one that threatens not just the Deltan people, but all life in the galaxy. Please, you're our only hope." Roy's eyes narrowed, the iridescent glow within them pulsing slightly. He had left the Deltans behind long ago, choosing to walk his own path, but something in the leader's tone, in the urgency of her plea, stirred a feeling within him that he had thought long buried. "I'll be there," he said simply, ending the transmission. When Roy arrived in Delton space, he found a galaxy on the brink of war. Massive fleets hung in the void, poised to strike at a moment's notice. Planetary defenses were at full alert, citizens huddled in fear as they awaited the coming storm. And at the center of it all, the Devourers. But they were different now, changed. No longer the mindless swarms that Roy had faced before. They moved with a terrible purpose, their actions coordinated, precise. It was then that Roy saw him, the Dark One. A human like himself, but one who had embraced the darkness fully, let it consume him utterly. He stood at the head of the Devourer horde, his eyes black pits, his face a twisted mask of hatred and hunger. Roy felt the darkness within him stir, felt it reaching out, recognizing a kindred spirit. But he pushed it down, focusing on the task at hand. He rallied the races of the galaxy, forged them into a united front against the coming darkness. And so the war began. Across 100 worlds, Roy and the Dark One clashed, their powers tearing at the fabric of reality itself. Planets were shattered, stars extinguished, as they dueled across the cosmic battlefield. But even as he fought, Roy began to sense a deeper truth. The Dark One, in his own twisted way, sought not just destruction, but unity. A galaxy united under his iron rule, where all races bowed before the power of the darkness. And Roy, the eternal outsider, the one who belonged to no race, no world, began to question his place in this conflict. Was he fighting for the right side? Or was he just perpetuating the cycle of violence and mistrust that had plagued the galaxy for so long? In a final cataclysmic battle, Roy and the Dark One faced each other across a blasted wasteland. Their powers collided, ripping apart time and space around them. As realities shattered and dimensions folded, Roy looked into the eyes of his foe and saw a reflection of himself, a dark mirror of what he could become. And in that moment he made his choice. He reached out not with his power but with his mind, his heart. He embraced the darkness, not as a weapon, but as a part of himself. He let it flow through him, merge with him, until he became something more. In a blinding flash of energy that rippled across the cosmos, Roy and the Dark One vanished, leaving behind a galaxy forever changed. The Devourers, without their master, scattered to the winds. Their threat ended as suddenly as it had begun. And in the aftermath, as the races of the galaxy looked to the stars and wondered at the fate of their savior, a new age began. An age of understanding, of cooperation, of unity. For Roy had shown them the truth, that darkness and light, good and evil, were not absolutes but two sides of the same coin. That true strength came not from conquest, but from acceptance, from the willingness to embrace all aspects of oneself. And though he was gone, vanished into the annals of legend, his legacy lived on. In every act of compassion, in every gesture of unity, in every being who looked to the stars and dared to dream of a better tomorrow. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.